Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura.
She said that if there was a time when you were getting beat up in a room and couldn't walk out, you would reimagine it in a way that you were actually able to leave the room.
You were in the courtroom. I want to get your sense of how the jury was reacting to Cassie's testimony throughout the...
Cassie's testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom, silencing even the most composed spectators. This wasn't just a tale of a messy breakup or a troubled relationship. There was something far darker lurking beneath the surface. At the heart of her claims were the so-called freak-off parties, a term Cassie coined to describe secret gatherings where she says she was forced into actions against her will. And just when it seemed her account couldn't get any more unsettling, it did. So what exactly were these freak-off parties? According to Cassie, these were not your typical glitzy Hollywood bashes with champagne and flashing cameras. Instead, they were meticulously orchestrated events, designed by Diddy himself, where women were allegedly expected to perform under strict control. These gatherings were more than just parties. They were staged performances for the entertainment of Diddy and his guests. Cassie testified that early in their relationship, she was coerced into attending these secretive events, quickly realizing refusal wasn't an option. She recounted feeling powerless as Diddy supposedly controlled every detail, from her wardrobe and behavior to the very people she was allowed to engage with during these nights. Her testimony unveiled a chilling narrative of manipulation and exploitation. To the outside world, their relationship appeared like a glamorous fairy tale, filled with luxury and affection. But in court, Cassie exposed the darker reality hidden behind that polished facade. She detailed the controlling tactics that began within days of their involvement, setting the stage for years of domination. According to her, these freak-off parties were framed as an unavoidable part of being with him, almost like a cost she had to pay to remain in the relationship. The courtroom buzzed with tension as these revelations unfolded. The courtroom was anything but serene as Cassie's words sparked audible gasps. She painted a grim picture, not just of attending these parties, but of being trapped in a role she couldn't escape. According to her, the events were a mix of powerful guests chosen for their status or wealth, alongside women expected to comply without question. The message was clear: no resistance, no defiance, just obedience. For the prosecution, Cassie's testimony marked a crucial moment. They argued these gatherings illustrated the control and abuse she allegedly endured throughout their relationship. By exposing the secretive nature of these parties, they revealed a pattern of relentless manipulation aimed at breaking her spirit. This wasn't a story of isolated incidents, but a chilling saga of sustained and deliberate domination. It offered the jury a stark window into the darker side of Diddy's world. Behind the polished image of a charismatic mogul, Diddy allegedly blurred the lines between power and consent in ways few could imagine. Then came a revelation so shocking it silenced even the most seasoned legal minds. Cassie revealed that at one of these parties, Diddy allegedly commanded her to participate in acts with others while he looked on. She described feeling utterly dehumanized and powerless, calling these gatherings some of the darkest chapters of her life. These devastating claims painted a picture of a man who not only controlled every facet of her existence, but weaponized that control to coerce her into unimaginable situations she would never have agreed to otherwise. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavy with emotion. Diddy himself struggled to keep his composure as the harrowing details emerged. Shocked spectators exchanged uneasy looks as the allegations deepened in gravity. But this was just the opening act. Cassie's testimony wasn't mere words. The prosecution signaled they had evidence to support her story. Among the proof was surveillance footage from a 2016 incident, briefly mentioned soon after, leaving a lasting impact on the case. The testimony promised to bolster her claims with undeniable credibility. As the courtroom held its breath, anticipation surged. Everyone was eager to hear what revelations would unfold next.
Friend Cassie Ventura is set to retake the stand and face what we expect to be her final round of questioning under cross-examination. Court currently is on a short lunch break, but if you recall, the judge previously said that he wanted Ventura's cross-examination to wrap up before lunch today. Prosecutors have said that Ventura, who's nearly 9 months pregnant, could soon go into labor.
Over the last hour, the defense has been asking Ventura more about her 2018 rape allegation against Combs, Ventura's drug use, her mental health problems, and a 2014 threat that she made to a man who claimed he had seen a sexually explicit tape of her, also raised in court. The defense at one point asking Ventura, quote, "Do you still have love for him?" referring to Combs. And Ventura answered by saying, quote, "I have love for the past and what it was."
A hush fell over the courtroom as the prosecution played the surveillance footage, key evidence from a 2016 assault that has become a cornerstone in Cassie's case against Diddy. Until now, much of the trial had hinged on her testimony and accusations alone. But this video introduced a new level of seriousness to the proceedings. The footage served as a visual anchor, transforming claims that might otherwise be dismissed as hearsay into undeniable proof. Suddenly, it was no longer a simple matter of her word against his. Here was evidence that demanded attention. Cassie's testimony detailed the 2016 assault as a moment filled with sheer terror. She described feeling trapped and overwhelmed as Diddy's anger, which she said often turned physical during their relationship, escalated beyond anything she had ever imagined. On that day, she said, the abuse crossed a line. She recounted being cornered, verbally berated, and physically harmed in a chilling episode that, she insisted, perfectly encapsulated the abusive nature of their relationship. While her words painted a vivid image, the surveillance footage made it impossible to deny. The prosecution wasted no time emphasizing how the video supported Cassie's account. Though the footage wasn't made public, it was described in court as clear and compelling. It aligned perfectly with Cassie's timeline and gave those present a first-hand glimpse of the trauma she endured. Cassie testified that the incident left her emotionally shattered and physically vulnerable, just as countless others did throughout their time together. For the jury, the powerful combination of her detailed testimony and the corroborating video forged an undeniable sense of credibility. Observers noted the visible discomfort on the defense's side as the prosecution drove home how the evidence dismantled their attempts to downplay Cassie's claims. Before the footage was introduced, Diddy's legal team had tried to portray their relationship as turbulent but consensual, minimizing the allegations of ongoing abuse. The video, however, told a starkly different story. It gave weight to Cassie's descriptions of control and violence, directly challenging the defense's narrative in a way mere words could not. Reactions in the courtroom varied, yet the jury remained glued to the screen. Reporters described an atmosphere thick with disbelief. Some jurors leaned forward, brows furrowed, while others exchanged concerned glances as they absorbed the unsettling scenes. For everyone watching, it was a sobering reminder of how powerful such evidence can be in court. Cassie's raw, emotional testimony now had a visual companion, cementing the prosecution's argument that Diddy's alleged abuse extended far beyond private disagreements. The defense, however, sought to blunt the impact by focusing on technicalities. They argued the footage didn't capture the full context and questioned whether it was truly representative of the entire relationship. Their strategy largely aimed to discredit Cassie, suggesting that isolated incidents shouldn't define years of their time together. Legal experts noted this was a delicate tactic, as it risked appearing to dismiss evidence now firmly etched in the jury's memory. Nonetheless, the emotional power of seeing a victim's claims validated visually was difficult to counter. Cassie's testimony had already earned sympathy, but the footage delivered a forceful impact words alone could never achieve. Though the specific details of the video weren't released publicly, insiders described it as potentially one of the trial's most pivotal moments. It painted a broader picture of Diddy's alleged abuse and reinforced Cassie's narrative of feeling powerless throughout their relationship. By the time the prosecution wrapped up this phase of their case, the damage to Diddy's defense was palpable. Tensions in the courtroom spiked as everyone waited to see how his lawyers would respond to what some called bombshell evidence. Unsurprisingly, the defense pivoted to an unexpected tactic, presenting affectionate messages Cassie had sent Diddy after their breakup. Whether this strategy would succeed remained uncertain, but it raised new questions about how they intended to reshape the story of their relationship moving forward.
Right, when they say that Cassie Ventura is the most critical witness to this case. The defense is doing its job because what they're trying to do is bring out that she's not a perfect person. that they're saying she might have wanted to engage in these freak-offs on more than one occasion, that she was willingly staying in this relationship with Sean Combs, even though she knew that it was an abusive one. They're bringing out things that she said to other people that are less than flattering. All that being said, the government doesn't need to have a perfect victim. What the government has done this week essentially is establishing the sex trafficking crimes that they've charged Sean Combs with. And I would argue that they are well on their way to proving these crimes. A lot of people don't realize that with sex trafficking, you don't have to have movement anywhere. You don't have to go across state lines. A lot of times people confuse it with human smuggling. Here, somebody can be trafficked in their own home. All you really need is someone providing somebody else for that commercial sex act. And when I say commercial, I mean anything of value, not even necessarily money, to be given by force or coercion. And so Cassie Ventura has done her job this week for the government, and now the defense is doing its job to try to make it seem as if she wanted to be in this relationship and that what happened in those freak-offs was not coerced.
The defense believed they had found a way to counter the emotional intensity of Cassie's testimony. They introduced affectionate messages she had sent to Diddy after their breakup, text exchanges that, at first glance, suggested warmth, humor, even lingering care. It was a calculated move, aimed at casting doubt on her harrowing allegations by showing a softer post-relationship dynamic. Initially, it looked like a strong play. Presenting moments of lightness and connection seemed to contrast sharply with the dark stories of abuse Cassie shared. But the moment those messages were read in court, the atmosphere shifted, not in the way the defense had hoped. Rather than dismantling her claims, the tactic felt awkward, even tone-deaf. The strategy that might have seemed sharp on paper came across in court as strained and out of sync with the emotional gravity of the case. So what exactly were these messages, and why did the defense rely on them so heavily? While only a few were publicly described, they reportedly reflected a casual, at times even tender tone, Cassie appearing upbeat, affectionate, or at least communicative. The defense leaned on this, suggesting it was inconsistent with someone claiming years of trauma. If Cassie had truly endured such abuse, why would she reach out like that afterward? That was the question they planted in the jury's mind. But the prosecution responded swiftly and sharply. They explained that trauma doesn't operate in clean, predictable patterns. Survivors, they argued, often continue contact with their abusers for complex emotional and psychological reasons. Cassie herself would later take this point even further when she addressed the texts directly. According to her, those messages weren't expressions of warmth. They were survival tactics. Taking the stand, she calmly confirmed she had sent them, but made it clear they reflected a coping mechanism. She said the tone was a form of self-protection, a way to avoid triggering further harm. The messages, she explained, weren't signs of affection. They were shields, meant to preserve safety in an unpredictable and intimidating post-breakup landscape. From the outset, the prosecution had accused the defense of cherry-picking. They said these isolated texts were pulled out of a broader, more painful context in an effort to spin a narrative that simply didn't reflect the full truth. And as the trial progressed, many watching from the outside began to question just how effective this defense maneuver really was. Inside the courtroom, the divide between both sides grew sharper. On one side, a defense clinging to a digital paper trail of civility. On the other, a survivor recounting stories of coercion, violence, and psychological torment. The disconnect was stark and increasingly hard to reconcile. Many observers wondered aloud, was this really the best argument Diddy's team could offer? Outside the courtroom, public opinion split. Some questioned why Cassie would maintain any communication with Diddy at all if her claims were true. But others, particularly those familiar with abusive relationship dynamics, were quick to push back. Survivors, they explained, often struggle to cut ties cleanly. Emotional manipulation, fear, and even hope for change can keep them connected. Long after the abuse ends, critics accuse the defense of misunderstanding or outright ignoring the emotional complexity of trauma. Some called their strategy outdated and insensitive, saying it only proved how disconnected they were from the realities survivors face. But Cassie's own explanation became the most potent rebuttal of all. Facing the jury, she didn't flinch. She acknowledged every message and unpacked their meaning with clarity and strength. She said that leaving the relationship didn't erase the years of control and fear she'd experienced. In fact, some messages reflected ongoing anxiety about potential retaliation. Keeping things civil, she said, was not a gesture of affection, it was a method of self-preservation. What the defense had hoped would poke holes in her credibility instead ended up reinforcing her testimony. The courtroom felt the shift. Cassie had taken a potential weakness and turned it into a powerful piece of her narrative, evidence not of inconsistency, but of just how far abuse can reach into a survivor's life, even after they leave. And as her testimony continued, all eyes turned toward Diddy. His carefully composed demeanor began to crack. Observers noted that he seemed visibly affected in ways he hadn't been earlier in the trial. The messages might have given him brief reassurance, but Cassie's explanation hit deeper. By the time she finished addressing that part of her testimony, the courtroom was charged with anticipation. Whatever came next, one thing was clear. Cassie's voice was growing stronger, and the defense's attempts to shake her were beginning to falter.
I want to get your sense of how the jury was reacting to Cassie's testimony throughout the week, especially the pictures and the texts that they got to see so far.
Well, I was in the overflow room today, but the consensus about the jury is that they've been pretty stoic. There was one juror who seemed to have a bit of a reaction when they were shown sealed photos. I believe it was about 2 days ago. These were freeze frames of Cassie and Sean Combs and an escort in an alleged freak-off still shots. So there was a little bit of a reaction there. But again, overall, the consensus also in the overflow room is just that people are shocked at a lot of this testimony, a lot of the evidence that's coming in. And it's tough. We are seeing, I guess, just like this side of Cassie that, unfortunately she's had to disclose to all of us to help get a conviction for Sean Combs. And you really feel for her because she's remained so composed throughout, her cross-examination, her direct, the redirects, and she's 8.5 months pregnant, and we didn't see her lose her temper or just get, angry at all or frustrated. And I find that
From the moment Cassie stepped onto the witness stand, every eye in the courtroom shifted, not just toward her, but toward Diddy. And it wasn't just her words commanding attention, it was his reactions. For a man known for unshakable composure and a carefully curated public image, Diddy's demeanor began to shift almost immediately. The more detailed and unsettling Cassie's testimony became, the more difficult it was for him to keep the mask in place. As she recounted shocking allegations, particularly those surrounding the so-called freak-off parties, the cracks in Diddy's posture and expression became impossible to ignore. Cassie wasn't vague or unsure. She named events, she painted pictures, she gave the jury and the room something specific to hold on to. And with every chilling detail she shared, Diddy visibly shifted. He squirmed in his seat, his movements no longer those of a man in control, but of someone caught off guard. Observers noted that he wasn't simply jotting notes or huddling quietly with his legal team. Instead, his discomfort was broadcast across his face, tight-lipped one moment, openly exasperated the next. By the time Cassie described the 2016 assault, punctuated by the prosecution's presentation of surveillance footage, Diddy leaned back in his chair, let out a slow, deep breath, and turned his face away from the screen. It was a striking image. This, once untouchable figure showing signs of vulnerability in a courtroom where every flicker of emotion could be scrutinized. Legal analysts commented that his body language might tell the jury more than words ever could. Where stoicism might imply confidence or innocence, emotional outbursts, or even suppressed frustration, risked conveying exactly the kind of volatility the prosecution was arguing had defined his relationship with Cassie. And the pressure wasn't his alone to bear. The entire courtroom seemed to feel the weight of Cassie's words. As she detailed the degradation and coercion she allegedly endured, the atmosphere changed. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Some jurors looked shaken. Her description of the freak-off parties, of feeling powerless, degraded, and emotionally suffocated, hit the room like a slow-building storm. The jury, who had been mostly impassive until that point, now seemed visibly unsettled. Some glanced in Diddy's direction while Cassie testified, as if trying to read his response, to search for some alignment between the man she described and the man sitting across the room. Others kept their eyes fixed on Cassie, expressions marked by a mix of disbelief and empathy. Then came the moment that would shift the courtroom into a new level of tension. Cassie described a specific incident where Diddy allegedly humiliated her publicly, using his influence and power as tools of control. As she spoke, Diddy shook his head in disbelief and leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something with clear agitation. The content of his words was inaudible, but the emotion was not. It was a clear break from the image he had tried to maintain, and the courtroom felt it. You could practically hear the collective breath being held. Every whispered remark, every shake of his head, every clenched jaw, those moments weren't lost on the jury. As Cassie continued, the focus shifted to the emotional aftermath of the relationship. She described living under a constant fog of fear, saying resistance was never truly an option. Her words painted the portrait of a woman cornered, not just physically, but psychologically. And it was during this portion of her testimony that Diddy's composure seemed to finally shatter. He reportedly clenched his fists, leaned forward abruptly, and engaged in what appeared to be a tense, whispered exchange with his legal team. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough in impact. The courtroom froze. The tension was so thick, so palpable, that it became a presence of its own. For several long seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that only falls when something deeply consequential has just occurred. In that moment, it became clear that this trial would not be shaped by evidence alone. It would be shaped by moments, the high-stakes psychological theater playing out in real time. Every tear Cassie shed, every whispered frustration from Diddy, every sideways glance from the jury. These weren't just details. They were the very substance of a narrative that was no longer confined to documents or transcripts. People began to ask, in a case this emotionally charged, how much would be decided by the facts, and how much by the way those facts made people feel? Cassie's lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs isn't just another celebrity scandal. It's a seismic moment in a much larger shift reshaping Hollywood. For decades, powerful figures in entertainment operated with near-total impunity, protected by their fame, influence, and a deeply entrenched culture of silence. But that era is cracking under the weight of public awareness and legal scrutiny. This case goes far beyond one toxic relationship. It's about the machinery of control that has long shielded stars and silenced victims. In another era, Cassie's story, full of disturbing allegations of coercion, manipulation, and systemic abuse, might have been dismissed, diluted, or buried in tabloid noise. But today, in a post-Me Too world, the climate has changed. Survivors are no longer alone, and the public is no longer looking away. Cassie's decision to speak out is part of a broader movement, a wave of women and men forcing the spotlight onto the darker corners of an industry built on image and illusion. Hollywood stars may shine in public, but this trial is a stark reminder of the darkness that often thrives behind the scenes. We've seen this shift before. The Harvey Weinstein trial cracked the dam. What followed was a flood of allegations, lawsuits, and cultural introspection. From Russell Simmons and Kevin Spacey to R. Kelly, once untouchable icons have been brought into the public and legal crosshairs. Now Diddy walks that same path, and the implications of his trial could echo just as loudly. Public reaction has been immediate, but complex. Many have rallied behind Cassie, calling her brave for challenging a music mogul of Diddy's stature. Hashtags trended. Articles dissected her every word. Supporters see her as a symbol of resistance against an abusive system. But not everyone's convinced. A vocal faction questions the timing, points to past affectionate texts, and wonders why she stayed silent for so long. These skeptics echo familiar refrains, ones that survivors of abuse hear all too often. This split in public opinion reveals something deeper than one case. It reveals how the power dynamics of Hollywood still shape our perceptions of truth. As industry insiders have noted, power and image create an ecosystem of fear. The more influence someone wields, the harder it is for victims to come forward without risking everything, from their reputation to their career. Cassie isn't just accusing an ex. She's challenging a mogul, a cultural architect, someone who's spent decades building a bulletproof brand. That's not just brave, it's monumental. And the stakes for Diddy are enormous. His name has stood for success, hustle, and reinvention. But if these allegations stick, that legacy could unravel in real time. Still, the impact of this trial may extend beyond court rulings or monetary settlements. It's a challenge to the very infrastructure that allows abuse to flourish. It's about who gets protected and who gets silenced. And even if Diddy isn't found legally responsible, the court of public opinion is already building its verdict. The message is clear. Unchecked influence is no longer immune to consequences. Power doesn't mean protection. Not anymore. This isn't just about Diddy or Cassie. It's a message to the entire industry. The old rules don't apply. The age of silence is over. Survivors are reclaiming their voices, and in doing so, they're reshaping the cultural and legal landscape of entertainment. Cassie's testimony didn't just implicate a man, it exposed a system. Her harrowing account of coercion, violence, the infamous freak-off parties, and the 2016 assault has turned this trial into a moment of reckoning. Her story forces us to look inward. How many more stories like hers remain untold? How often has silence been mistaken for complicity? The entertainment industry is at a crossroads, and whether or not this case delivers a conviction, it has already delivered a warning. The spotlight is no longer just for the stars. It's now aimed at the shadows. Stay informed, stay vocal, and remember, silence enables abuse.